The book you see on the screen is part of the first edition of A Christmas Carol, a short novel written by British author Charles Dickens and published on the 19th of December 1843. At first glance, it looks like a normal book, and indeed, it is. There is nothing particularly striking about it, except for one thing: its price. While in Great Britain, Dickens' book sold for around £2.50 in its day, the United States it could sell for as little as 6 cents on the dollar. With the same money you bought the book in England, you could buy 42 copies in New York. Now the question is, what on earth was the reason for this huge difference? Well, the blame for such disparate prices falls on intellectual property. Yes, on copyright, on patents. You see, just as it is now with modern movies and books, when the author like Charles Dickens wrote a book in Britain, only he and his publisher had the right to sell it. If someone copied the book and sold it without authorization, bam, go directly to jail. So in short, Dickens and his publisher could set whatever price they wanted, and of course, they chose a price that was high. However, across the Atlantic, well, let's just say that Americans were not particularly concerned about British copyrights. In the US, it was perfectly legal to copy books by foreign authors like Charles Dickens and sell them on your own account. This had a very clear consequence. Since anyone could copy and sell books, this fierce competition made them super cheap. Or, to put it another way, if Charles Dickens had wanted to go to the United States with his book and sell it on his own, he wouldn't have made $1. Without ownership's rights to the work he himself had written, it seems he would have been impossible to make money from, or at least to make much more money than any other copycat smarty pants who could also sell it. But what if I told you that the reality was very different? What if I told you that many British authors at the time actually made more money selling their books in the United States than in Britain? Yes, you heard that correctly. So the question is, how? How is it possible without patents? Well, that is precisely what we're going to tell you in this video. In this video, we will explain why patents may not be as necessary or as important as they seem at first glance. What's more, we'll explain how they could actually be causing serious economic problems. I'm sure you have heard more than once that without patents, companies would not innovate, that pharmaceutical companies would not research new drugs, or that authors of books and films would not be able to dedicate themselves to their work. But haven't you also heard that many pharmaceutical companies, for example, abuse the fact that they are the only ones who can offer a drug in order to raise its price? Didn't British publishers take advantage of their monopoly to overprice books in Dickens' time? Whatever the case, it is clear that patents have clear advocates and clear detractors. And so today on VisualEconomik, we are going to answer 3 crucial questions. What are the serious economic problems that patents could be causing? Is it true that if they did not exist, pharmaceutical companies would not invent new drugs, book authors would not make money, and companies would innovate less? And if so, is there an alternative to patents that avoids these potential problems? You want to find out? Of course you do. So let's get cracking. Okay, VisualEconomik viewers, in this first section, we're going to talk about patents and pharmaceutical companies. Specifically, how drug companies take advantage of patents to sell their pricey drugs at the expense of sick people who are willing to pay anything for them. Damn those pharmaceutical companies, always taking advantage of other people's misfortunes. But wait a minute, what if in reality, pharmaceutical companies had no alternative but to patent their invention and monopolize the market? Let me explain. During the process of research and development of medicines, companies have to go into debt, hire people, buy research materials. I mean, come on, they have to assume very, very high costs. And of course, all of this without any guarantee of success. We are also talking about costs that are becoming increasingly higher. For example, according to a study by Deloitte, the cost of developing new drugs has almost doubled since 2010. Perhaps if we didn't let the pharmaceutical companies patent their drugs, they simply wouldn't make enough money to continue researching. And I know, this sounds crazy. How can pharmaceutical companies not make money? If they're real giants, I'm sure they're stuffed to the gills with cash. I just don't believe they're not. Well look, according to the same report, the world's top 12 pharmaceutical companies are finding it increasingly difficult to make a profit. In 2019, they barely achieved a return of 1.8% on the research and development investment that they made. If this situation continues over time, pharmaceutical companies would end up making more money buying US Treasury bonds than investing in new medicines. Or in other words, the business would simply no longer be profitable. So, is this the definitive proof that patents are needed for new medicines? Do pharmaceutical companies have to sell their medicines at high prices in order not to lose money? Well, I'm sorry for the patent advocates out there, but no, or at least not necessarily. You see, when a company develops a new drug, it is usually not the only one to do so. Imagine a new disease appears, such as the coronavirus, for example. All the pharmaceutical companies quickly realize their business opportunity and start developing their own vaccines. To do this, naturally, pharmaceutical companies have to spend money on research, on clinical trials, on machinery. In short, everything necessary for the process of researching and developing the new drug. And yes, I said drug, because don't think this is something that only happens with the coronavirus or vaccines, this is something that happens with the entire pharmaceutical sector. According to the National Institute of Healthcare Management, out of the more than 1,000 drugs approved in the 1990s in the United States, only 238 were drugs that provided innovative benefits. In other words, 80% of new drugs were copies that pharmaceutical companies developed and produced in order to compete with each other. And yes, I know what many of you are thinking. All of this is interesting trivia, but is it relevant for discussing whether patents are positive or negative? Well, the answer is yes. Take a look at this. Of all pharmaceutical R&D spending, only 25% is earmarked for new medicines. All the rest, that's 75%, goes to research on unnecessary drugs that generally only serve to allow pharmaceutical companies to compete with each other. Think about it. If there were no patents, pharmaceutical companies could copy drugs directly without having to spend so many resources on developing slightly different versions of the same copy. So perhaps they could make more profit or direct the money they spend today on developing truly innovative medicines. In other words, the existence of patents could be leading pharmaceutical companies to invest less in real innovation and development and instead invest in copying each other, precisely the opposite of what, in theory, patents are intended to achieve. In any case, the harmful effects of patents are not limited only to the pharmaceutical sector, which in fact is perhaps the most debatable and complex of all. Do you want to hear about some more and perhaps worse cases? Of course you do. So let's get into it.
The tragedy of the anti-commons.
This graphic you see on the screen shows the main web server software used around the world. Let's say that these are the programs where all the web pages are stored and processed. As you can see, out of all of them, there are two that stand out above the rest: Nginx and Apache software. And do you know the funny thing? They are not copyrighted. They are open source programs. Anyone can download these companies' software for free and use or modify it as they wish. It may seem strange to you that there are companies dedicated to programming software and distributing it for free. But in truth, in the world of technology, that is much more common than it seems at first glance. A clearer example is that of Android mobiles, because I don't know if you know this, but Android is nothing more than a modification for mobiles of the Linux open source operating system. If Linux had never existed, or if it had been closed source, Android would not exist today. And it is precisely this that leads us to the following question. If companies were not able to use new technologies from other companies to innovate even more, as Android was able to do with Linux, is it possible that patents are holding back technological development and therefore economic growth? Well, the answer is yes, and that is called the tragedy of the anti-commons. Between the 70s and the 90s, the IT sector was experiencing the clearest example of what we would call a technological and industrial boom. It was during those years that today's big companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft were born. In the same way, the computer environment was also the home territory of piracy and free software. That is a place where intellectual property rights played, rather a minor role. What's more, until 1981, patenting any computer program was practically impossible, a veritable legal limbo where pre-digital laws did not reach. Even so, and no one will doubt this, the software companies of the time developed like nobody's business. In reality, the fact that companies could take advantage of each other's inventions due to the lack of patents made innovation levels extremely high, which by the way was reinforced by two additional factors. Firstly, because competition was so great that if a company did not innovate enough, it ran the risk of being copied and quickly falling behind. So it had much more incentive to innovate constantly than it would with a patent system. And secondly, because thanks to the weakness of intellectual property rights on the internet, small and new companies could copy large corporations and quickly establish themselves in the market. Small companies that not only copied, but in turn used the advances of large companies to improve their own products. In conclusion, a system without strong patents fostered competition, innovation, and equality of opportunity. Although, yes, well, I know all this is a bit, how can I put it, speculative, don't you think? As a theory, this is all very well, but is there any data or studies to back this up? And the truth is, yes. In fact, there are several. The first is a US study that found that as a result of legal changes that facilitated intellectual property rights in the 1990s, companies that patented their software innovations reduced their research and development spending by 10%. What's more, in a recent analysis attempting to explain why the United States seems to be losing entrepreneurial dynamism, economists Axigit and Ates suggest that if the United States is stagnating, it is in large part because patents are monopolizing knowledge. Now, what does that mean? Well, since the beginning of the century, large companies have systematically patented their technological developments, making it impossible for small companies to imitate or implement their technology. As a result, small companies are falling behind and large companies have less and less competition, so they, in turn, innovate less and less. Why keep innovating if no one is going to take the market away from you? Specifically, while in the early 1980s, the top 1% of companies held about 38% of patents, in 2010, that figure soared to 55%. But not only that, from that very moment, the number of patents assigned to startups and small companies dropped drastically to less than half. Take a look. A fully fledged case of concentration and stagnation. But that's not enough for you? You want more proof that without patents, business innovation can run smoothly? That investors and authors can find their niche in the market without intellectual property laws to protect them? Well, what better proof than the example with which we started this video? How could it be that English authors made more money selling their books in the United States, where there was no copyright, than in Great Britain? Well, guess what? Now we're going to talk about precisely how companies or authors can make money with their inventions without the need for patents or copyrights. Check this out.
The advantage of being the first.
How could English authors make money without copyright in the United States? Well, they did it by taking advantage of the fact that, while the book was not published, nobody could copy it. What they did was to sign an exclusive contract with a publisher who then had the privilege of releasing the book before anyone else. This made money for two reasons. Firstly, because the author's most ardent fans bought the book as soon as it was published and could only buy it from the publisher who had the exclusive rights, allowing the latter to generate extraordinary revenues. And the second is that there was also a strategy that allowed publishers to avoid copycats. What was it? Well, nothing less than getting a lot of copies of the very book from the very first moment and getting them very cheap. By doing that, everyone who wanted to read the book would be able to read it from its launch, and the copycats would have almost no one to sell their copies to. This exclusivity effect is by no means unique to the literary sector. Being the first to invent or produce something is advantageous in practically all sectors. For example, a pharmaceutical company launching a drug could probably sell it exclusively for a couple of years without anyone copying it. Because there's something you have to keep in mind, and that is something we easily forget, that in general, the process of copying is not instantaneous and is not always successful. For example, if someone wanted to copy the format and type of videos we do here on VisualEconomik, they would probably have to study economics for months and years. They would have to learn how to shoot and edit like us, and they would also have to know how to write with our style and thematic approach, as well as my inventive way of pronouncing names. Even so, I will tell you one thing. I am sure that even if someone managed to do all that, the majority of the audience, that is most of you, when we are talking about replicas, people always prefer the original. And do you know what? This is exactly what happened in the case of Red Hat, a cybersecurity company that in the early 2000s released a software package for around $60. Shortly after releasing it, two companies called HCL Design and Linux Emporium legally downloaded and resold an exact copy of this package for a price that was 3 times lower, for $16. And do you know what happened? Red Hat sold more packages than their two copycats combined. And in fact, as of today, Red Hat is a cybersecurity empire, while HCL and Linux Emporium, well, had you even heard their names before watching this video? I didn't think so. Be that as it may, here is a question to answer. Why did people prefer to buy the official Red Hat version if it was the same as the copycat version, but 3 times more expensive? Well, that's a question answered by another question. If you had a problem with a product, would you prefer to ask for assistance from those who developed it, or from those who simply copied it? What guarantees that the copycats will be around in years to come, or in case you need to help or get updates? Are you going to trust the creators, the innovators, or those who only know how to copy? The pioneers, the originals, always have advantages to exploit. In any case, this video is far from a call for the destruction of the patent system, because patents have positive aspects. It is true that a company or an author can make their inventions profitable without them, but it is clear that patents make them even more profitable. Perhaps, without patents, the pharmaceutical company that develops a cure for cancer can make money and recoup its investment, but undoubtedly, the ability to monopolize the market is an additional incentive that could end up benefiting everyone. What this video is a call to take into account the harmful effects that intellectual property rights cause and an innovation to look for ways to resolve them. For example, a reduction in the years of monopoly guaranteed by patents, the replacement of patents by a reward system for those who contribute to business innovation, or an early purchase system for medicines that have not yet been developed. There are many alternatives, and several economists such as Nobel Prize winner Michael Kramer have already proposed some of them. And if you're interested in the subject and would like to know more about it, let us know and we can explain in another video. At this point, it's time for all of you. What do you think of the intellectual property system? Would you make some changes to it as like us, or would you completely overturn it? And what alternatives can you think of? You can leave your answer in the comments below. And as far as we're concerned, don't forget that we upload videos every week. So if you found this video interesting, please like it and subscribe to all of us here at VisualEconomik. All the best, and I'll see you next time.